Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a pretty critical Apache Tomcat vulnerability. We're talking about path equivalence here, and it's got potential implications for RCE, info disclosure, even injecting bad stuff.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I think, is how specific the conditions have to be. It's not straightforward, which honestly makes it perfect for this kind of deep dive.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this then. So the scope here involves Apache Tomcat versions 11.0-M1 right up to 11.0.2, also 10.1.0 M1 through 10.34, and version 9 as well, 9.0.0.M1 up to 9.0.98. Quite a few versions there.
A significant chunk of the user base, definitely.
So the core idea is this path equivalence.file.name, internal dot. How exactly does that work? Can you break down that internal dot mechanism for us?
Sure. So what's fascinating here is how Tomcat might handle a path with, say, weird dot components like wbdi-inflogs.foo.txt. It might interpret that differently, normalize it differently than the underlying OS or maybe how the developer intended. This mismatch, this difference in interpretation, that's what an attacker tries to leverage. It can let them sort of step outside allowed directories.
Ah, okay. So it's like a translation error between the request and how Tomcat sees the file system?
Exactly. A translation error is a good way to put it. And that's the loophole for those outcomes you mentioned earlier, RCE, disclosure.
Right. Let's walk through the first scenario. Information disclosure or maybe malicious content injection. You mentioned a specific set of conditions needed for that.
Precisely. It's not just one thing. First off, you need rights enabled for the default servlet. Crucially, that's not the default. You have to explicitly turn that on.
Okay, so that's a big hurdle already.
It is. Then, you need support for partial PUT. Now, this one is enabled by default. It's a feature for uploading files in chunks, useful for large uploads or spotty connections.
Right, I see. Default on versus default off.
Yeah. And then there are more conditions. The place where sensitive stuff gets uploaded needs to be like a subdirectory of where public stuff goes. The attacker also needs to know the actual names of those sensitive files being uploaded.
Wow. Okay, so they need some insider knowledge or good guesswork.
Pretty much. And finally, those sensitive files, they also have to be getting uploaded using that partial PUT method.
Got it. So multiple things have to align perfectly. It's really that interaction between the default setting partial PUT and the non-default one, the rights enabled. That seems key.
Absolutely. It really underscores how default settings, even seemingly harmless ones, can interact with specific, maybe less common configurations to create a vulnerability. You need to think about the whole picture.
It definitely makes you reevaluate default configurations. Now, let's talk about the really serious one, remote code execution, the RCE. What extra steps does an attacker need for that?
Okay, so for RCE, you still need those first two conditions. Rights enabled for the default servlet, which is off by default, and partial PUT support, which is on by default. But then two more critical things come into play. The application has to be using Tomcat's own file-based session persistence. And crucially, it has to be using the default storage location for those sessions.
Okay, file-based sessions in the default spot. And the last piece?
The application needs to have some library, a dependency, that's vulnerable to a deserialization attack.
Ah, the deserialization vector. So the attacker could potentially upload a malicious session file using the path equivalence.
Exactly.
And then when Tomcat tries to load that session data, the vulnerable library deserializes it and boom, code execution.
Precisely. That combination is lethal. It turns that path issue into a full server compromise, potentially. And it really raises that important question about, not just Tomcat settings, but the whole environment, the libraries you use, how you handle sessions. It's the combination.
It highlights that whole supply chain risk aspect too, doesn't it? The libraries you pull in.
Absolutely. You need that specific mix. Tomcat session handling, the default location, and a library with a known deserialization flaw. It's quite specific, but obviously very high impact if those conditions are met.
So what's the fix? Is it just patching?
Well, the immediate fix is definitely patching. Upgrade to Apache Tomcat 11.0.3 or 10.1.35 or 9.0.98. Those versions address this specific path equivalence problem.
Okay, patch, patch, patch. But what's the bigger lesson here?
I think the broader takeaway is about understanding the interplay. Default settings, like partial PUT, aren't inherently evil, right? But you absolutely have to understand how they interact with your specific application configuration, like enabling rights, and your dependencies, like potentially vulnerable libraries.
It's about that combined risk.
Exactly. It's a reminder that security requires constant vigilance about how all these pieces fit together, not just looking at them in isolation. This vulnerability is a perfect example of a multi-factor issue.
So it really drives home that security isn't just about the big, obvious holes. It's these subtle interactions, these combinations of seemingly minor features or defaults that can create really critical attack vectors.
Indeed. And maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. How many other default features in Tomcat or other software you use might combine with your specific setup or libraries to create unforeseen risks? Are there other seemingly benign combinations lurking in your own environments that haven't been scrutinized? That's something worth reflecting on.
That's a really powerful closing thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep digging, and we'll catch you on the next one.